Hello everyone, welcome to the art and science method to nailing the behavioral interview. With this video, I aim to change how you approach behavioral interviews for the rest of your career. So please, don't think about this as one video that you're watching to prepare for one interview coming up. Instead, try to watch this with the mindset of leveling up your interview skills for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And the best thing is, since behavioral interviews are asked for literally every role out there, whether you're a product manager, engineer, marketer, analyst, data scientist, lawyer, and every role seniority as well, whether you're an early stage IC or a company executive, this video truly applies to everyone. So if you find it helpful, please tell your friends. Okay, so let me get a bit more specific about why you should take this seriously. First, most people are not naturally good at behavioral interviews, which is funny because I find that nearly every person thinks they're better at behavioral interviews than they are. So, not to be presumptuous, but this may be you too. Second, it's really important to getting the offer for whatever you're interviewing for now. For almost every company, the behavioral interview holds just as much weight as any of the other interviews, no matter what role you're interviewing for. And finally, like I said, this is a long-term skill. So it's really important to getting offers throughout your whole future career. I guarantee there will always be a behavioral interview, regardless of the company or role you're interviewing for. So please approach this video with an open mind. And if you do that, I think it will pay off huge throughout your career. Okay, today we're going to cover 4 crucial sections for nailing the behavioral interview. First, the mindset. I find that most people approach these questions with the wrong mindset, which has an enormous impact on every answer you give and just makes the entire process harder than it needs to be. Second, the style. Unfortunately, there is just as much art as science to the behavioral interview. So we're going to cover some important tips here. Third, how to prepare. I'll share how I can prepare now for an interview in 1/4 the amount of time that it used to take me with a very simple shift in methodology. And finally, what you came for, 14 core questions that you should always prepare for. I found that most questions actually are a variation of these core questions. So these should prepare you well for most things and at least loosen you up enough to answer any others that aren't on this list. All right, let's start with the mindset. The most important thing to nailing the behavioral interview is having the right mindset. This greatly influences how you approach preparation, what content you say, and how you deliver each answer. I find many people have the wrong mindset, which then permeates through every single answer they give in subtle ways. So the first tip, approach each answer as a short story. If you think of the spectrum of dense to entertaining, far too many people anchor on the dense side. They're convinced that the most important thing to a good answer is jamming in as much relevant content as possible. And therefore, most of their mental capacity is devoted to not forgetting a single detail. But instead, picture this. The person interviewing you is coming from probably their 8th meeting of the day. They're tired. They don't really enjoy asking these questions any more than you enjoy answering them. And they've sat through more mind-numbing interviews than they could care to admit. Okay, so now that you're thinking with the mindset of the interviewer, how do you hold the interviewer's attention? That's the question. Well, you need to pick a good example, tell it in a structure that's easy to follow, then use the style tips in the coming section. Your secret mission should be to make your story entertaining enough that your interviewer would consider telling their spouse about it at dinner that night. So please approach every answer as if it's a short story. You may just find that you have more fun with it too. The second big mindset shift, remember that the question is asking more about your future than your past. Another reason why people tend to give answers that are too long and too detailed is that they don't think about the real intention of the question being asked. So when an interviewer asks you, tell me about a time when, or to even give your background, remember, they don't really care about your past. What they really care about is what your past says about your future. So when you're asked, tell me about a time when you dealt with a challenging person, remember, what they're really asking you is, how will you deal with a challenging person at our company in the future? This is the real question. So when you start thinking with the mindset of the interviewer, you start to answer the real question that's being asked. which often translates to an answer that's less focused on the details and is structured around the higher level takeaways that you want them to remember. This is an important difference that we'll hit really hard on when we talk about the behavioral questions coming up in the latter half of this video. So, if you're in the majority, your mindset to date has probably been focused on the details about your past. From here, I want you to flick the light switch. Your mindset from now should be on telling a good story that's equally or more so about your future than the past. Okay, now let's talk about the style, which will help you tell great stories. Okay, so as much as it pains me to say this, the dirty truth is that style is equally as important as substance for nailing the behavioral interview. So while what you say is the foundation for great answers, how you say it is often the difference between an okay answer and a great answer. I bet you're thinking right now, but substance has to matter more though, right? And I hear you, but remember this, while substance is important, nobody wants to be the guy who's all style, no substance. If you lose the interviewer, then it really doesn't matter what substance you say. So instead, if you acknowledge that style is important to telling a good 3 to 4 minute story, then there's a much higher chance that the interviewer will catch and remember the substance you include. So now you may be actually saying, but I'm not a good actor, or maybe even, I'm not a good talker, I'm not a good native speaker even. And that's okay too. You don't have to be a great actor or speaker to have good style. So let me give you 5 tangible overarching style tips here for telling good stories throughout. These should apply to every answer. Then later in the video, I'll sprinkle in some style tips that are more specific to individual questions coming. The first overarching style tip that I give is to use simple layman language. In line with the mindset discussed, too many people think that the key to interviews is more jargon, more words. Often, it's the exact opposite. So try to default to simpler language. Not only will more people understand your points, but your points will be more impactful. So think of this. You can either remember that saying less ensures that the key parts that you want to convey are comprehended by the interviewer, or you can remember that simpler points land harder. See what I mean? Second, speaking simpler goes hand in hand with speaking slower. Regardless of how fast or slow you speak normally, try to push yourself to speak 10% slower than you typically do. And don't use me as an example because I'm trying to create an engaging YouTube video for you to get through right now. But in the interview, please speak 10% slower than you typically do. You'll find that the interviewer picks up more of what you're saying, and you may also find that slowing down indirectly simplifies your language. Third is to pause to land your points. Pausing is a powerful way to add emphasis. Just a 1-second pause is often the difference between something being instantly forgotten or written down by the interviewer as a good point. So by pausing, you're directing the interviewer's attention to what you want them to focus on. Think about it. If you take anything away from this video, it's that you should pause more. See? Pausing is also a helpful tool to give you time to think. Most of us are uncomfortable with even a second of silence. Try to become comfortable with it. If you do so, you can take a few seconds to collect yourself before every answer and even mid-answer sometimes as needed. Fourth, dial up the drama about 20%. So this goes hand in hand with simpler language, slower delivery, dramatic pauses. But remember that you can even be slightly more emphatic in how you talk and what you say, like you would if you were talking to your friends at a bar. And my final overarching style tip is that the key to good communication is striking the right balance of confidence, energy, and lightheartedness. First, confidence. You want to be confident, but you don't want to be overconfident. Don't brag. Just think of being matter of fact. I think matter of fact is kind of the phrase that you should be thinking about when it comes to confidence. Second, energy. Bring 20% more energy than you would typically bring to a meeting, and fluctuate throughout. Third, lightheartedness. Yes, you want this job, but please remind yourself that this really is just one interview in a long life ahead. So it's not the end of the world. And if you can include a smile or a chuckle here and there, it can really go a long way in helping you feel calmer too. So please relax, take the pressure off yourself. All right, moving on to the next part, how to prepare. Well, I know everyone has prepared for 100 behavioral interviews at this point in their life. Please hear me out in this section. In this, we're going to cover tips for the upfront preparation process before the interview, as well as tips for when you're in the interview. So before the interview, think before you memorize. Until very recently, I would prepare the completely wrong way, what I would call the study hard approach. So to prepare for an interview, I would simply write down long blocks of text to memorize, or I would just start pacing around my room and starting to try to memorize answers on the fly. Then I would continue doing this over and over and over, and I'd keep tweaking my memories until eventually I'd realize that the question that I'm answering actually is not being answered well at all. So then after about a week, I'd have to go back and redo all of my answers, and that just spent way too much time and mental energy. So I eventually made a simple change that allowed me to prepare in 1/4 the amount of time, literally. And I ended up with answers that were shorter and easier to remember, which I call the study smart approach. So what was the simple fix? Well, I'd list down what questions I wanted to prepare for first, which is why I give you this list of 14. That can be your starting list. Then I would list a few short bullets that I would think would make for a great answer for each. And once I was confident, after I spent a day making sure these were the bullets that I wanted to remember, then I would memorize my answers. Doing so will save you a ton of time, a ton of mental space, and will result in far better answers too. In my experience, it now only takes me 2 to 3 days to feel well prepared compared to 10 or so before. So think about what you want to memorize, then memorize it. Second, before the interview, prepare for follow-ups and curveballs by, believe it or not, laying on the couch. This may sound wild, but I'm a big believer that laying on the couch can make you a better interviewer. Here's how. While this video prepares you for the vast majority of questions you'll be asked, there will certainly be follow-up questions that either ask you to go deeper, and there very well may be a few that you truly didn't prepare for. So to me, the trick for preparing for the unknown is simple. Just lay on the couch for about an hour and dust off your memory. So here's how it works. Lay down on your couch, plan to be there for an hour, pull up your resume or LinkedIn, or just think back to the first experience that you had. Let your mind time travel back to that time. Like really go back there. Look around, where are you sitting? What were you working on? Who were you working with? What was the name of that person? What was the project called that you were on? Did it go well? What did you like? What didn't you like? Then repeat this for every large experience in your career that you think they may ask about. And that's it. Just the act of mentally time traveling back to that time is going to prepare you well for a lot of follow-ups or unanticipated questions because you'll feel like you literally were just working at these various places yesterday. Next, in the interview, if you ever get worried about a question, just pause and jot down some scratch notes. Most people feel the need to respond immediately to everything, but you don't have to. It's totally normal and understandable if you say, of course, let me collect my thoughts for a minute, or yeah, sure, give me 1 second. It's totally human to say that. In fact, it kind of feels unnatural to never have to pause. So while you probably won't need to do that for every question, definitely don't feel bad about doing so every few questions. Finally, in terms of what questions to ask at the end if there's time, don't ask questions that you want to know the answer to. Instead, prepare questions you think they want to talk about. So before you scoff at this, hear me out. The main goal of the interview is to get the job. Therefore, you should be solely focused on that. So I'm going to order the types of questions that you could ask, that most people ask, from worst to best. So first, we have check the box questions. I'm sure you have experience with these because these are the most common. These are the questions where it's clear you're just asking something because you know you have to ask 3 questions. And since everyone can see these coming from a mile away, neither the interviewer nor you really get excited about asking or answering them. Some examples include, what's the hardest part about your job? What keeps you up at night? What's the culture like? The problem is these questions don't make you look particularly good, and they also don't make the interviewer feel good. The second worst type of question is questions that you're interested in. A lot of people think that they should ask questions that could influence whether they want to take the job. But again, the main goal of the interview is to get the job. So why not take those questions that you have and save them for after you get the job offer? Then you can ask someone other than the person interviewing you what their candid response is. So even if you want to know what the culture work-life balance is like, just don't ask the interviewer. Get the offer, and then ask the recruiter to talk to someone on the team before accepting, where you can probably get more candid answers. Which brings me to the best type of question to ask, questions the interviewer wants to talk about. People love talking. So if you want to make the interviewer feel like you did a great job, ask them an open-ended question and let them take it away. So here, I like to ask questions in this format. First is the setup, where I'll try to show that I've either done some homework or I've thought deeply about some opportunity for the company. Then I'll follow that by an open-ended question that I think they'll likely be interested to talk about for 5 minutes or so. So here's an example. If I was interviewing for, say, Meta. Given the shift to the metaverse, I'm curious how Meta is able to balance the fact that billions of people are using its products now versus the fact that they want to build the platform of the future. I feel like this could be a bit of a tension, but I'd love to hear from your point of view how the company is managing that tension or if you've ever experienced that tension directly. So see what I did with that question right there. One, it makes me look good because it shows I've either done some homework or I've thought deeply about the implications of what's going on at the company. And then second, it makes the interviewer feel good because now they get to talk for as long as they'd like, and they probably want to talk about this. Okay, so now that you have the mindset, the style, and the process, let's finally get to what you came for. What are the questions and what bullets should you say for each specific question? Okay, while there are an infinite number of specific questions you could be asked, I'm going to go through what I call the core 14. The reason I think these are core is because I found over time that most questions just seem to be variations of these questions. This is an important mindset shift. Most people think that there are thousands of questions that could be asked. Then you inevitably get overwhelmed because it's impossible to prepare for every permutation of question. Don't think about it this way. Instead, think like a politician. So regardless of your view of politicians, they do operate with an insight that most of us can learn from. Most questions can be pivoted to a relatively small set of talking points. So I call this the politician principle, and it allows you to simplify the world down in your head. There are not thousands of questions, but rather a limited set of questions that you need to prepare for. Everything else can be pivoted toward the question you want to answer. For example, say you're asked, tell me about a time when you were overwhelmed and how you responded. So while overwhelmed was not one of the core questions I mentioned, I theoretically could pivot it to any of the following answers. For instance, I could say, sure, one of the most overwhelming projects I worked on was when I was working on a project across 5 different teams. Hint, worked cross-functionally answer is coming now. Or I could say, I think it's easy to get overwhelmed when there's a gap between what's expected and the time or resources you have to do it. In fact, a few years ago, I was working on a team that, hint, a few resources answer coming. Another, at Facebook, I was on a team that was being formed from scratch. We weren't aligned on a direction, let alone a starting place. And we also didn't have a full team of people to execute. So as you could imagine, I was pretty overwhelmed. Here's what I did about it, though. Hint, ambiguous situation answer coming. And final one. Sometimes the most overwhelming times are when there are tensions between people. This was actually the case a few years ago. Hint, difficult person answer coming. Okay, so that's the politician principle. From here, come up with your list of core questions and write them down in a Google Doc. I've put 14 here, but you may see some gaps, or maybe you want to add a couple more. Then think through your short bulleted answer for each and memorize them. Then practice pivoting any question you may be asked to questions you've prepared for. The way that you do this is you just alter the opening of your answer to mirror what they asked. And if you find there truly is a different question that you didn't prepare for, don't worry, just simply add the question to your list and keep going. So let's start with the most important question. Tell me about yourself.